Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program, Making Black Lives Really Matter in New Jersey. I'm so thankful that you've joined us for this important moment in time. I want to say a quick shout out and a word of thanks to my Institute colleagues for putting this program together. We are the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, a majority woman of color team of some of the fiercest advocates I know, powered by fierce advocacy that seeks to repair the cracks in our foundation. And we're so thankful that you've joined us tonight. We're governed by a mighty board of trustees, some of whom have joined us tonight, including Nina Wells, Paulette Brown, Jim McQueenie, Jerry Harris, Antoinette Ellis Williams, John Lowenstein, and Sandy King. In the week that we commemorate the life and legacy of Dr. King, America began to turn a corner yesterday by swearing in President Biden, who in his inaugural speech said, "The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer." And what previously seemed impossible was made visible by the power of our votes, which pushed America around the corner to the swearing in of our first ever woman, first Black person, and first South Asian person elected as vice president. President Biden acknowledged in his remarks that America is beginning to turn this corner even as we grieve the incredible loss of 400,000 people to COVID-19, as we confront a structural racism pandemic, and in the aftermath of a deadly siege by domestic terrorists who stormed our nation's capital earlier this month. This is, to be sure, both a painful and a precious moment in the history of our country. It is true, as poet Amanda Gorman powerfully shared yesterday, that for a while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. Both history and the future also require us to turn a corner right here in the state of New Jersey, where Black people confront some of the worst racial disparities in America. 53 years ago, Dr. King visited New Jersey to build support for the Poor People's Campaign and to build support for a guaranteed income program. And 53 years later, as my colleague Laura Sullivan, who leads our economic justice work, will explain further, 53 years after Dr. King visited New Jersey to build support for the Poor People's Campaign, the individual net wealth for Black and brown people in New Jersey is $179. It bears repeating that the individual net wealth for Black and brown adults in New Jersey is 179 United States dollars. But for white individuals in New Jersey, the median net wealth is $106,000. This staggering racial wealth gap was created by design. And so in this critical year, where every seat is up in our New Jersey legislature, we need your voice. We need your advocacy to help design a reparative system of policies, of practices, of priorities that deeply invest in the value and empowering Black lives. Dr. King said that there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take a position because conscience says it is right. And that's what tonight's release of the Institute's 2021-2022 action agenda and our critical conversation with Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver and leading elected officials is all about. It's about doing what is right to make Black lives really matter in New Jersey. Tonight, we will outline how it's past time to empower Black lives through a guaranteed income, through baby bonds, through student loan cancellation, through the transformation of policing and the development of community-based public safety systems, through youth prison closure and community reinvestment, through same-day voter registration and early voting, and through reparations to repair the harm of our cracked foundation. To begin this conversation, we're fortunate to have with us Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver, a trailblazer in every sense of the word. In 2010, she became the first Black woman in New Jersey's history to serve as Assembly Speaker, and just the second in our nation history to lead a state legislative house. And in 2017, in a moment that was 350 years in the making, Sheila Oliver became New Jersey's first Black lieutenant governor. It is for us an honor to have her join us and to welcome her to this important conversation. And so we welcome you, Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver.
Thank you, Ryan. And I'd like to thank the Institute for extending an invitation to me to participate in this dialogue tonight. And I'm going to channel the words of our Vice President Harris, who has said from the beginning, she may be the first, but she won't be the last. And I just want to share that for those Black young women that are listening, that I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And one of our future female African-American lieutenant governors are participating with us tonight, just as we've all prepared for Amanda Gorman to be president one day. So I don't know, like many of you, yesterday was a very, very, very exhilarating day for me. For several years now, I have uttered an opinion that there is a foul mood permeating America. And there's always been a foul mood that has permeated our nation. But this past decade, many of us that pay attention and hashtag stay woke, we began to see things from one end of this nation to the other that indicated that we were having regression as opposed to progression. As we experienced the events from a gentleman on a Sunday morning going to jog on his early day in his own neighborhood, being shot down, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, just think of what we have endured these past several years. But something different happened during 2020. And we have young people, that next generation, to thank for that. We saw for the first time in many years a national socially active movement focused in on many of the issues that the Institute is unveiling with the release of its agenda for 2021, which is from chaos to community. Yes, we've been in chaos. We've always been in chaos. You know, many of us often say that when there's a downturn in the economy, it doesn't really affect us that much because we're used to being in those adverse conditions. But the reality in 2021, in this decade, is that we now have demonstrated and proven to ourselves that we can, in fact, do something about it. And it is through organizing, it is through educating, and it is through embracing an agenda based on data. The Institute has provided us with some of the most introspective data as it relates to the conditions of underserved people in this state and in our communities. Let's begin, first of all, with the whole social justice agenda and the judiciary and the criminal justice system. We know that the Institute worked very hard to address the issue of youth incarceration. We got a lot of things done based on that work, but there's a lot more to do. Just the other day, I received a letter from a young man in Yardville, and I get these kinds of letters all the time. Often I describe them to Ryan, but I got a letter from a young man 2 years ago. I spoke at a graduation ceremony they had. This young man wrote a letter 2 years later to me, just a month ago, And he told me how much I had inspired him, that life wasn't over for him. But what he said was, please work on not waving juveniles up to adult level for charges. And that is continuing to happen to our young people. Assemblywoman Sumter and Assemblyman Wimberly, their Senate partner in their district, Senator Nellie Poe, has focused on several pieces of legislation to address that. I've heard from young people who have gotten 40-year sentences when they were 17 years old. And many of them shouldn't be there. So part of the agenda of the Institute this year is to begin to finish out that agenda on youth and youth incarceration and support to young people with community-based alternatives. And what really gets to be important is us making certain that we are continuing to beat the drum to improve outcomes in our public education system. Because many of the young people that find themselves in that situation, we can go back through their history and their involvement in our public education system, and they did not get what they needed. So we cannot forget that piece of the agenda. The baby bonds, great, great, great kind of a initiative championed by our US Senator Cory Booker. You know that Governor Murphy did incorporate and propose that we begin baby bond appropriations in the budget this year. We didn't get there, but it doesn't mean we won't get there. We have to begin to look at more creative ways of building wealth in our communities and doing it in novel new ways. Baby bonds and financial literacy, heightening everyone's consciousness about how you build wealth is something we have got to do. It can't just be about we want another program for this or a program for that. We've had a 55-year history of governmental programs designed to elevate the economic experience of people of color. It hasn't gotten us there. I think we need to reevaluate the investment at a federal and state level in those kinds of programs, and how can we better utilize those resources to have quicker outcomes for people. Home ownership is something that I beat the drum for as the commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. Home ownership is woefully inadequate in our communities of color. At the New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, for the first time in years when Governor Murphy was elected, we restored and revamped the first-time home buyer program, providing a minimum of $10,000 to those who wanted to pursue home ownership, working with those financial institutions that we do business with and making them do business with our populations of people. We're able to offer mortgages to people at a 3% interest rate. And with Melanie Walter going over as our new HMFA executive director, she's extremely excited because she thinks we're going to be able to significantly expand that program during 2021. Those are the kinds of initiatives that the Institute has been focused on, providing avenues to eradicate college debt, college financing debt for people. I'm often ashamed. I'm a baby boomer. So, I came of age and went to college during a period of time where there was a great deal of resource available to go to college. When I meet young students today in our state and I talk to them about education, financing education, I'm ashamed to tell them how much it costs me to go to Columbia University for a master's degree. Certainly isn't available to students today to do that. And we've got to get back to that. In our state, our own EOF program is responsible for over 40 to 50,000 African Americans and Latinos having college degrees in this state. We need to expand those initiatives. But eradicating college debt, I was so happy to hear President Biden yesterday incorporate that into one of his top priorities, because the elimination of debt for students who have gone to college will help us tamper down that wealth gap even more. There's a whole variety of things we've got to do with wealth gap, with youth justice, with home ownership, with business and economic opportunity. I was on a call the other day that was hosted by Pastor Jefferson at Metropolitan Baptist Church. Randall Pinkett was one of the panelists. And we all know Randall in New Jersey, who famously won The Apprentice. But the more important thing is he started his own business 21 years ago. He disclosed on that call that in 21 years, he has never received a contract from the state of New Jersey. 21 years. But you know, he's been successful. He does business all over the country. And, you know, it was disheartening to hear a prominent young business leader in our state say that his own state had never given him the opportunity to do business with that state. That's another thing that has to be focused on as we go from chaos to community. It makes no sense whatsoever that our minority and women and veteran-owned businesses in this state get no opportunity to do business with this state. And I know that that is part of our legislative Black caucus's agenda as they move forward in 2021. So I want you to know that, you know, from the Murphy administration, we have not wavered from the progressive platform that we ran on. I know that for many people in our state, we're not moving fast enough. And I'm one that won't dispute it, because I like things to happen just like that, just like that, just like that. But often we cannot do that. But what I will say, as state government and as a state governmental leader, we've got to abandon the old ways of going through bureaucratic kinds of experiences. We've got to cut out the red tape, cut out the bureaucracy. If you want to get something done, I believe, like Nike says, you just do it. And I think that that is the agenda and the platform of the Institute this year. I know you're going to hear from some of our legislators this evening who are working on some of those progressive pieces of legislation. And Ryan, just know that there are those of us in leadership in our state government that totally embrace the agenda of the Institute. You have been invaluable in working with us. And when we do good, you let us know. But what's more important is when we're not doing good, you have to let us know that. And we don't have to be polite about it. I tell a lot of young people who are activists, you don't have to apologize for the work that you are doing. We haven't apologized for that work since those whose shoulders we stand on, they didn't apologize. And we owe it to them as we provide leadership not to apologize either. That's how we've gotten thus far. That's how we have to continue. And I often say, I come from the school where you get out there and you hold up your picket sign. So I want to thank the Institute for the work it continues to do. I want to thank the Board of Trustees of the Institute for holding up this work. And I think that we need you more than ever as our think tank as we pursue economic and social justice in New Jersey. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Oliver, for those powerful remarks. We're so humbled and honored to always be able to reach you. And like you said, even at times when we might not always be on the same page, we're always on the same long-term goal for progressive social justice values here in the Garden State. Thank you so much for your leadership. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea McChristian, and I'm the Law and Policy Director here at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Institute, we're a legal advocacy organization based in the mighty city of Newark, New Jersey, whose advocacy seeks to empower people of color by building reparative systems that create wealth, transform justice, and harness democratic power from the ground up right here in New Jersey. And I'm thrilled to be able to lead and moderate tonight's important conversation with the Institute team and legislative champions on what it will take to make Black lives really matter in New Jersey, framed by an outline of the Institute's 2021 through 2022 action agenda. And as we engage in tonight's powerful questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom and on Facebook, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the program. We'll also drop a link to the action agenda and some other relevant links throughout the program as well. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. These words are the powerful conclusion of poet Amanda Gorman's awe-inspiring poem, The Hill We Climb, which she recited during yesterday's presidential inauguration. And I want to start my brief remarks today with those haunting words because we all have the capacity to see and be the light of social justice here in New Jersey, but we must be brave enough to step into that truth. Because as we reflect on the performance of yesterday's presidential inauguration and the horror of the white terroristic attacks on our nation's capital just a few weeks ago, we must also cast our eyes forward to what lies ahead. And what lies ahead for us here in New Jersey? This year in the Garden State, the governor's seat and every seat in the legislature is up for election. Elections matter. Who we vote for to represent us influences our daily lives in so many ways, from employment to housing, as the Lieutenant Governor spoke about, to education, to public health, and so much more. Yet knowing this and taking a cold, hard look at ourselves, how much do we really engage with the democratic process? Do you know your local state legislators? When was the last time you attended a city council meeting? Have you ever testified at a legislative hearing? If you answered no to these questions, please know you aren't alone. As we outlined in our report, Our Vote, Our Power, written by my colleague Henel Patel, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, a recent study shows that less than 20% of people can name their state legislators, and a third can't name their governor. So in answering these questions tonight, I implore you not to think of this as a critique, but rather a call to action. A call that in this year of so much uncertainty, you and we join together to hold those who seek our votes accountable to an agenda that prioritizes our needs, particularly the needs of those who are often the most marginalized. We must implore those who want our votes to go beyond the hashtag, beyond empty rhetoric, beyond non-diverse tables where decisions are made for diverse people, beyond the posts that appear once a year on Dr. King Day. Instead, we must implore those who want our votes to be the light in and of the Garden State by committing to a racial and social justice agenda that will make Black lives really matter in New Jersey. And at this point, you may ask yourselves this: why is a racial and social justice agenda to make Black lives matter in New Jersey necessary here, in ostensibly one of the most progressive states in the nation? Well, such an agenda is necessary because while a state of immense prosperity, New Jersey's failure to fully reckon with its history of divestment from Black communities has led to our state having some of the worst racial disparities in the nation, a few of which I will highlight now. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once stated, "You don't have to see the whole staircase, just see the first step." Well, here in New Jersey, we're able to see several steps in the staircase of racial inequity. At the top, New Jersey is now home to the worst Black to white infant mortality rate in the nation at over 3 to 1. A reflection of COVID-19's disparate impact on communities of color, the Black to white likelihood of COVID-19 hospitalization is at over 2 to 1. Next, and as noted in the Institute's Youth Justice and Rights Restoration reports, New Jersey has the highest Black to white incarceration disparity rates in the nation in both its youth and adult prisons. Further, 62% of incarcerated people denied the right to vote are Black, even though Black people make up only 15% of the population. And let's look at policing. The Black to white likelihood of facing police force is 3 to 1 in New Jersey, and in education, we're the 6th most segregated state in the nation. And as Ryan mentioned, and as my colleague Laura Sullivan will elaborate on in her comments, New Jersey currently has one of the starkest racial wealth gaps in the country. Now, this is a foundation that illustrates the cracks of racial injustice in New Jersey's foundation, cracks that are causing earthquakes due to the devastating and ongoing presence of COVID-19. But here at the Institute, we don't stop at the issue. No, we identify solutions to repair the cracks, to create a new normal for Black people here in the Garden State, a new normal that will put weight behind the proclamation that Black Lives Matter here in New Jersey. And this charge sets a new foundation, the foundation upon which we are proud to announce the launch of our 2021 through 2022 agenda to make Black lives really matter in New Jersey. As my colleagues and our esteemed legislator guests will speak to in a minute, our agenda is divided into 5 urgent priority areas. First, we will work to close New Jersey's racial wealth gap through the creation of a statewide baby bonds program, a fully funded guaranteed income pilot program, the cancellation of student loan debt, and expanded home ownership opportunities in Black communities. And I saw in the comments there was a question, what is a baby bond? My colleague Laura will get to that in her comments. Second, we will prioritize transforming New Jersey's broken youth justice system by finally closing New Jersey's broken youth prisons and investing in kids to develop a fully funded community-based system of care. Third, we will work to keep communities safe through the development of a culture of accountable policing and investing in community-based public safety options as an alternative to law enforcement. Fourth, we plan to ensure democracy for all in a number of ways, including through voting for people in prisons, same-day voter registration and early voting, ensuring racial justice is imbued in the redistricting process, and limiting police presence at the polls. And last, but certainly not least, we'll advocate for the underlying thread of all our priorities, repairing the harm of racism, through ensuring the comprehensive release of COVID-19 data and the creation of a reparations task force. To delve deeper into how we will achieve these priorities, it's my pleasure to now engage in a discussion with both my Institute colleagues and legislative champions who are leading the way on a number of issues outlined in the action agenda. And again, we'll drop a link to the agenda in the chat. First, I'll speak with Laura Sullivan, the Institute's Economic Justice Director, and Assemblyman Benjie Wimberly about how we can work together to close New Jersey's stark racial wealth gap. Next, I'll turn to Ashanti Jones, the Institute's Community Engagement Manager, and Brooke Lewis, Institute Associate Counsel, as well as Assemblywoman Verlina Reynolds Jackson to inform us how we can work to transform New Jersey's youth justice system and keep our communities safe by reimagining what public safety in the Garden State can look like. We'll then have a powerful discussion with Henil Patel, Director of the Institute's Democracy and Justice Pillar, around ensuring democracy for all. And we'll conclude with words from Institute Policy Associate Tiara Moultrie and Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter on how we can think globally around these issues to repair the harm of racism. We'll then leave a few minutes at the end for audience Q&A, so please make sure to drop any questions again in the Zoom Q&A or on Facebook. So let's get started with how we can close the racial wealth gap here in New Jersey. And my first question is for my colleague, Laura. Laura, as you know, New Jersey has one of the starkest racial wealth gaps in the nation, with a median net wealth for white families of $352,000, the highest in America, but only $6,100 for Black families. And you also illustrate this disparity further at the individual level in our recent fact sheet, Black and Brown New Jersey. Could you delve further into what priorities the Institute will lead with to address this racial wealth gap disparity in 2021 through 2022, as well as what people tuning into today's program can do to advance these efforts?
Certainly. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to our distinguished panel this evening as we talk about the importance of making Black lives truly matter here in New Jersey. As Andrea noted, the data show us that New Jersey has one of the worst racial wealth gaps in the nation. And as Ryan mentioned in our recent analysis of individual level data in the state, we found that New Jersey, Black and Latino residents have just $179 at the median in savings, essentially no rainy day fund for times of need like the pandemic that we're living through today. And by contrast, as Ryan pointed out, the typical white resident in the state has over $100,000 in assets, a substantial sum that's not only a rainy day fund, but also funds that can be used for education, housing, and retirement, and really provide a longer, long-term security. So what can we do to change these stark patterns of inequity? With our knowledge that wealth inequality is a modern manifestation of generations of policies that have created barriers to wealth building for Black and other families of color, we feel that it is imperative that we work with urgency and with purpose to create new reparative policies to close the racial wealth gap. So as mentioned, at the Institute, we've identified a number of priorities to help close the racial wealth gap in New Jersey. The 4 key ones that we're advocating for this year are the baby bonds program, the guaranteed income pilot program in the state, student loan forgiveness, and expansion of home ownership in the state. So as these were mentioned earlier, we really think that they're important priorities that we want to work to advance in the state. So I'll talk about each one of them briefly and then share how listeners can get involved. So first, baby bonds. I know there was some interest in this, and it's a way that has been advocated and led by the leadership, academic leadership of Derek Hamilton, and as noted by the Lieutenant Governor, our own New Jersey Senator Cory Booker has promoted the federal legislation. So it's a way to undo generations of wealth inequality by ensuring that newborns from low-income families have financial resources from birth to help them get that head start that their wealthier peers already have. So as noted, the governor helped support this proposal last summer, and then Assemblyman Wimberly, who will speak on this in a few minutes, as well as Assemblyman Moen, have led the legislation in the Assembly as primary sponsors to create the New Jersey Baby Bond Program. So currently, the legislation would give low-income newborns $2,000 to help with higher education or other asset building opportunities as they transition into adulthood. This would be an interest-bearing account that would gather potentially more funds and interest over time. I encourage participants in tonight's discussion to learn more on our website. You can go to our Action Center, where you can directly contact your representatives, as well as learn about the legislation and many of the other action agenda items that we'll mention tonight. Second, building on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, we believe that economic security should be accessible to all, not just a few. And as he stated, the curse of poverty has no justification in our age. We support developing and funding a guaranteed income pilot program in New Jersey cities to create a foundation for expanding guaranteed income programs across the state and country. Leadership from mayors across the country, including Newark Mayor Baraka, have helped to create a movement for guaranteed income. And we support the expansion of this movement through legislation that is sponsored by Assemblyman Wimberly, who can provide additional details on the legislation in a few moments. We want folks to learn more about it, and you can contact your state legislators to support this bill as well. It's A4568. Third, as we noted in our recent report, Freed from Debt, a social justice approach to student loan reform in New Jersey, we think that both state and federal policymakers need to help undo the student loan crisis that was created in large part from public divestments in higher education in recent years, especially since the Great Recession. Our research has shown that shifting the cost of higher education to individuals has disproportionately harmed Black families. We're supporting forgiveness of federal loans as soon as possible, and we'll be working with New Jersey leaders to obtain forgiveness, and we're working to advocate for forgiveness in the NJ class loan program as well. It is crucial that we also feel it is very crucial that that forgiveness be paired with increased investments in higher education so that the next generation of students is not left in the same situation as today's borrowers. With the current momentum that we see for national student loan forgiveness, we really are encouraging listeners tonight to call their congressional representatives, because there's a lot of momentum in this area nationally to support student loan forgiveness. And we also hope that you'll continue to follow our work at the state level. You can join our email list on our website, and we hope that you'll continue to follow these efforts as we work for loan forgiveness with leaders such as Assemblyman Moen on policy proposals that we advocated for at the state level in our recent report. Fourth, we're working to expand homeownership in communities of color, as Lieutenant Governor Oliver highlighted. Homeownership is so important, and we want to help expand and improve on existing homeownership programs in the state. Our recent report, Erasing New Jersey's Red Lines, released last year, highlighted that just 41% of Black families in the state are homeowners, compared to over 3/4 of white families. Additionally, recent data shows that a higher income Black mortgage applicant was less likely to get a single family home loan approval than their white peer who was lower income in recent years in New Jersey. So we are advocating to expand homeownership. We feel that homeownership is such an important part of the wealth package for families that equalizing access to homeownership really should be an important piece of committing to economic justice in the state. One of the proposals from our report, the creation of the New Jersey Reparations Task Force, as was noted, will be discussed later by my colleague Tiara, and we think that's an important piece of legislation to repair the harm of previous policies such as redlining, which created some of the inequalities we see today in homeownership. So in closing, I just want to say that we feel that closing the racial wealth gap must be a priority for racial justice efforts in the state, and we look forward to working with legislative and community leaders on these initiatives in 2021.
Thank you so much for that powerful statement, Laura. I'll now pose a related question to Assemblyman Benjie Wimberly. Assemblyman, thanks so much for joining us. You're leading legislative efforts on a number of items in the Institute's agenda, including banning police chokeholds, the creation of a reparations task force, and others. And you've also ably championed bills in the legislature focused on developing both a guaranteed income pilot program and a statewide baby bonds program, both of which Laura mentioned. These two bills are key to our effort to close New Jersey's racial wealth gap. Can you speak to why these initiatives specifically are so important to remedying New Jersey's economic inequities?
Well, thank you. And Laura did an outstanding job outlining everything that we're doing with these bills. But Andrea, I mean, the reality is it's not a New Jersey issue. It's, 402 years of systemic racism. And that's where the financial gap in wealth continues to be. If you look at the history of America and you see that we were enslaved for 246 years, and then we dealt with segregation for another 89 years. That's where the wealth gap is. And the argument of everything that Laura talked about, from student loans to health care debt that we've lived in, to not having home ownership, to so many issues that have put us behind the 8 ball, that it is this proof that we're not looking for a handout when you talk about reparations. It's a reality that we are old. This country was built on our back. New Jersey was built on our back. I'm a product of public housing. I'm a product of a single mother. I lived in a neighborhood that was infested with drugs and I guess activities then, not as harsh now, but gang activities and things of that nature. So the chance of me getting out of there from a single mother home is probably like 1 in 4. 1 in 4 of us got out. The other 3 ended up in jail, on drugs, or not gainfully employed. So these are the lives I live. I don't have to Google anything. This is what I live every day, that I see. And when I walk down the street, these are the people that I grew up with. And unfortunately, at 56 years old, I've become an elder in our community, which is really ridiculous. You think about it, the guys I grew up with have passed away. They died, their kids looked at me as uncle, and everybody else, because it's not too many of us have stayed back here and done this. So the fight for wealth disparity is just natural. And you look at not just us. I think people get confused when they look at Patterson and Newark and Camden. Look down in Salem County, which is probably one of the poorest areas, in New Jersey and places like that, that we have to make sure that these folks have an opportunity to live gainfully. Because in the communities that I live in, and particularly in the urban areas, if we cannot get gainful employment, they're going to look for other options to get money. And unfortunately, that creates, the system that has continued for year after year of people, going to jail, going on probation. These people have gotten rich off the backs of us not being gainfully employed and not having enough finance to feed our families. You look at the drug and alcohol addiction in our communities. I particularly look at the men, Black men in our community. Many of them are on alcohol and drugs because they couldn't feed their families. They couldn't keep a job. And when they got a job that, it wasn't enough to pay things off. And these are the conversations I have every day. So that's why I will continue to fight when it comes to income equality and baby bonds opportunities for our kids. I talked to Ryan about it before. The baby bonds is a great idea, but is it enough? No, it is nowhere near enough. And for people even on our side of the aisle to argue that this is not a good bill, this is not, it's easy for you to say when you've grown up with a silver spoon in your mouth and you don't have to worry about paying for college and you don't have to worry about ever, coming home and having electric off or not having heat on or heating your house with kerosene. They don't know that feeling. So if they ever lived in the shoes of these folks, they would not argue about increasing the amount of money when you talk about baby bonds. Think about it. We always achieve with less. We achieve with less, and that's the bottom line. I think if we're given this a foot up financially, that's how many more doctors, lawyers, business owners, not just athletes, but managers of teams, owners of teams. That's the goal overall. So that's what I say, the importance of this and why I will continue to fight.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Wimberly, for leaving us with those words where we have a lot to reflect on and a lot of work to do. With that, I'll turn it to our transforming the youth justice system topic area. Ashanti and my colleague Ashanti Jones will take this question. Ashanti, through the Institute's 150 Years is Enough Youth Justice Campaign, we've been able to meaningfully drive the conversation around youth prison abolition and reinvestment into community-based youth programs. And as we outlined in our recent report, Beyond the Hashtag, this conversation is especially important now in this Black Lives Matter moment, a time when our state's youth prisons are 80% empty and we're entering budget season where there will be a close scrutiny of available dollars. In 2021 through 2022, could you outline the most important youth justice priorities for New Jersey and how the Institute will lead those efforts, as well as how those listening can get involved with the campaign?
Sure, Andrea, thank you for that question. First off, New Jersey's youth justice system is antiquated and broken. For one, New Jersey has the worst Black to white youth incarceration disparity rate in the country, with Black children being 21 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. In addition, the state spends approximately $300,000 to incarcerate a single youth per year, and over a quarter of those young people who are released from our state's youth facilities end up right back within them within 3 years. These tragic facts and more serve as the foundation of the 150 Years is Enough campaign. Since the campaign launched in 2017, we, with support from our community partners and New Jersey residents, have been able to drive meaningful change through our advocacy, gaining the closure announcement of Jamesburg and Hayes Youth Prisons by former Governor Chris Christie in 2018. And we were the first state in the nation to have all incarcerated youth tested for COVID-19. So for the 2021 and 2022 year, we have a two-pronged priority area that really builds upon the advocacy and the work that we've completed in earlier years. So last year, 50 young people were released due to the Public Health Emergencies Credit Bill that granted credits to youth incarcerated during the pandemic for an early release back to their communities to quarantine safely. And it is critical that we funnel resources into the community to support their successful reentry. Over the past few months, I've been able to speak with young people who were impacted by incarceration and their concerns around receiving quality therapeutic services, finding support systems in their communities, and fulfilling their basic needs like housing, health insurance, and food security have all illuminated some of the gaps that meaningful legislation can fill by establishing a strong continuum of care. For this reason, it's imperative that the dollars that are used to incarcerate young people follow them back into their communities upon their release to build a system of care that will address the issues that young people have within their communities without engaging them in the carceral system. So our first priority area really focuses on our short-term youth justice goal with the passage of A4663, the Restorative and Transformative Justice for Youth and Communities Pilot Program Bill, which is being championed by Assemblywoman Verlina Reynolds Jackson, who you will hear from in a moment. The bill will establish a 2-year pilot program in 4 cities, Newark, Patterson, Camden, and Trenton, where many incarcerated young people are coming from. The $8.4 million investment will ensure that enhanced reentry wraparound services are accessible and that restorative justice hubs are in place where young people can resolve conflict, find mentorship, and develop positive relationships with their communities. This bill will also function to provide reentry services for young people who are exiting the system to reduce the likelihood of recidivism. Success for the use of restorative justice hubs will incorporate best practices for mental health care for young people. With over 92% of young people entering into the criminal justice system having a pre-existing mental health diagnosis, it is clear that investment in incarceration should not be our state's default. We should be ramping up the quality and increasing access to affordable mental health services. Our second priority area is getting the state of New Jersey to align with our long-term goal to transform the youth justice system by passing the New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act, which will close the gap on one of our first successes and establish dates for the closure of Jamesburg and Hayes youth prisons and secure a $100 million investment in a community-based system of care that will keep our young people out of prisons, but in their communities, resolving conflicts, attending school, and receiving the social, emotional, mental health, and community support that they so deserve. The New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act also places a moratorium on New Jersey youth prison construction and forces the JJC to do a comprehensive analysis of its existing facilities to see which can be closed and ensuring that the cost savings are used for community-based programs. The Restorative and Transformative Justice for Youth and Communities Pilot Program Bill will be going to hearing next week on January 27th. If you find yourself interested in providing testimony in support of this bill, please feel free to contact me at ajones@njisj.org so we can provide you guidance. I'll also put that in the chat. And to support both this bill and the New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act, you can visit the Action Center that's located at our website at www.njisj.org and use our phone to action tools to email your legislators directly to let them know that you are supporting us transforming the youth justice system.
Thank you so much, Ashanti. And I'd like to also give a shout out to Assemblywoman Reynolds Jackson for her leadership, her Chief of Staff Ed Giddens for his leadership in pushing that bill to a hearing. We're very excited about it moving to a hearing next week. So again, thank you, Ashanti. And staying with the notion within the area of criminal justice transformation, I'd like us now to turn to the topic of keeping communities safe by revolutionizing public safety. And my next question is for my colleague, Brooke. Brooke, last year was a powerful moment of national racial reckoning with policing and public safety in the wake of the George Floyd murder. The recent storming of the Capitol and the police response to it have also renewed national conversation about the role of policing in the perpetuation of structural racism. Here in New Jersey, the Institute has served as a member of the federal monitoring team, overseeing reforms to Newark Police Division, and is also developing a separate body of work looking at community-based public safety options. Could you dive into the necessity of both of these approaches and how the Institute will further advance its policing and public safety work over the next 2 years and what we all can do to be a part of the process?
Sure. Thanks so much, Andrea, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight. So right now, the undeniable truth that Black Lives Matter is being tested everywhere in our country, including right here in New Jersey. We know that the time for deep structural change is now. And here at the Institute, we firmly believe that any police reform effort needs to center on the community's voice. And we definitely take this approach in our role on the independent monitoring team that's overseeing the reforms taking place to the Newark Police Division, where through community surveys, public meetings, and ongoing community feedback, we're really striving to ensure that the community's needs are really at the heart of this reform process. If we have any Newark residents tuning in, we do want to highlight that we really encourage you to take some time to complete the Independent Monitor's online survey. This is an opportunity for you to really share your views and opinions on public safety and policing here in the city of Newark. You can also join us on February 4th at 6 p.m. for a virtual community forum. And here you'll hear the Independent Monitor discuss and answer questions about findings in the most recent quarterly reports. Yet, even as we continue to implement reforms in the consent decree process, as well as through other processes, it's equally important that we're simultaneously rethinking the policing as an entire institution, and we really continue to work towards reducing its footprint in our communities. So to achieve these goals, the Institute's agenda is focusing both on community-centered police reforms that'll ultimately serve to create a culture of accountable policing, while also focusing on the need to invest in community-based public safety options. So first, when we look at creating a culture of accountable policing, one concrete thing we can do is create First Amendment policies that will ultimately protect civilians' rights during police encounters. So over the summer, as we all watched the horrific murder of George Floyd, many of us were in fact viewing footage that was recorded by community members. More and more, we're seeing police abuses are being revealed by bystander recordings. So the ability for people to freely record police conduct is a critical tool for holding law enforcement accountable. So as part of the federal consent decree, the Institute has been working with the Newark Police Division, and we've drafted a new policy that will provide specific procedures for how police officers need to interact with recording bystanders in order to ensure that their First Amendment rights are protected. And just as we've seen, the Attorney General has recently updated our state's use of force policies, we need to similarly create statewide standards for ensuring that law enforcement respects the First Amendment rights of all recording bystanders. So next, another thing we really need to do here in New Jersey is to ban and criminalize police use of chokeholds. As we watch George Floyd, Eric Garner, and countless others die at the hands of police, it's clear that chokeholds should have no role in New Jersey's policing practices. Currently pending in the legislature is Assembly Bill 4284, and this is championed by Assemblywoman Reynolds Jackson, who you'll hear more from in a few moments. In this bill, it'll make the use of chokeholds by law enforcement a first-degree crime that'll be punishable by up to 20 years in prison and or a $200,000 fine. Another thing that we need to be doing is make sure that we're limiting the military-grade equipment that's made available to local law enforcement agencies through the federal 1033 program. So as people in cities across the nation took to the streets to protest the police murder of George Floyd, we saw many peaceful protests met with military-grade weapons and vehicles. Police militarization undermines public trust, and it does not reduce violent crimes or increase officer safety. And New Jersey can help stop this type of police militarization by increasing transparency around this 1033 program. Specifically, the Attorney General's office can direct the Office of Emergency Management to review the 1033 program, as well as increase statewide oversight and transparency regarding the transfer of military equipment to local departments. Next, here in our state, we should really be striving to minimize the harmful effects of over-policing by reducing enforcement of non-serious offenses, particularly for our youth. Our state did take a meaningful step toward reducing law enforcement's footprint with its recent Attorney General directive that bolsters transparency around the use of station house adjustments, something that the Institute has been advocating for since 2016. This directive, among other things, it will require each state, county, and local law enforcement agency to report and collect data on the use of station house adjustments on a quarterly basis, and also make this data available to the public. Lastly, we're going to be working on a lot of other key reforms, like ending qualified immunity and passing Assembly Bill 4656 and Senate Bill 2963, which will create strong civilian complaint review boards through restoring subpoena powers, as well as the ability to conduct concurrent investigations. So even as we look to now move beyond simply creating a culture of accountable policing, it's equally important that we look to invest in community-based public safety options. So a really important thing that we can do for this is develop mental health first responder and crisis intervention systems that are going to rely on highly trained professionals other than police to address certain crises. So we know that those living with an untreated severe mental illness account for at least 1 in 4 of all fatal police interactions. This makes those with untreated severe mental illness 16 times more likely to be killed during a police interaction. So with this information, New Jersey needs to take a meaningful step toward limiting interactions between law enforcement and people with untreated severe mental illness. And they can do this by creating a non-law enforcement first responder system. In Oregon, for example, there's the CAHOOTS program, which has for over 31 years provided 24/7 crisis intervention in situations that might otherwise be handled by law enforcement. And so similar to Oregon, New Jersey should develop non-law enforcement response teams to respond to mental and other health crises. So as we do this, we also more broadly need to be looking to reinvest dollars into community-based services that will ultimately empower communities. So part of doing this is developing community-based systems of public safety, and also looking that it's critical that we invest in resources that will support healthy communities. So cities like Minneapolis and Boston, they've cut their police budgets to instead invest in important community resources like mental health services, economic development, and violence prevention. So cities across New Jersey need to similarly invest in community resources that will make our state more equitable, healthy, and safe. And lastly, we need to start funding restorative justice programs and services. As Ashanti mentioned in more detail, we are advocating for the passage of A4663 and Senate Bill 2924, which would create restorative justice hubs. So thanks so much for your time, and Andrea, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. And so Brooke mentioned that we are currently having a Newark annual community survey for Newark residents to get their thoughts on policing and public safety, as well as we're having on February 4th, the independent monitor overseeing reforms to Newark Police is having his next quarterly report event, and those links have been dropped in the chat. So please, please, please complete the survey and come to the event on February 4th. And now my next question is for Assemblywoman Reynolds Jackson. Assemblywoman, thank you so much for being with us. The Institute has been proud to stand with you on a number of different bills on our agenda, including legislation to limit police presence at the polls, which we're working with you very closely on right now, same-day voter registration, and early voting. And in the criminal justice sphere, we've also been guided by your leadership on the Restorative and Transformative Justice for Youth and Communities pilot program bill and legislation to ban chokeholds in New Jersey. Can you specifically speak to why these two agenda items are so critical to effecting meaningful criminal justice reform in the Garden State?
Absolutely. First, so I done pulled out my mic for the Institute, and I just want to drop the mic on all that is being said here today. You all are just phenomenal. I mean, Ashanti and Brooke and Laura, Lieutenant Governor Ryan, you are all in my head right now, because I too, I am a product of affordable housing. I am a TRIO member. I went to Upward Bound. I had EOF. We've had all of these great services. I have family members that have been affected by youth, you know, the minimum sentences, and then you try to get out and you try to restart over. All of this stuff, you know, I think, you know, we often hear, you know, when it gets personal, you really go after it. You try to make sure that it doesn't happen again for somebody else. And we are all on this call trying to do that. And the Institute, you are phenomenal at working with all of us. And I'm going to go back to my script now, but I was just sitting here holding all of that in. And in this moment, the national reckoning, the racial reckoning is more important now than ever. And we have meaningful criminal justice reform. On the youth justice front, I've been proud to stand with the Institute to advance the restorative and transformative justice for youth and community pilot program. And I know we said these numbers, but it's important that we write them down so that we have our actionable items when we get off this call. And it's A4663. This past November, due to the advocacy of so many of you on this call today, New Jersey released thousands of incarcerated individuals due to COVID-19. In addition to the incarcerated adults, the state has also released about 90 young people as well, and will continue to release more people with less than a year on their sentences while the public health crisis continues. It's critical that these young people returning to their communities are provided with the resources that they need to stay at home and out of prisons and be given career opportunities, so it's just not a job, but is life-sustaining to them. This is why I'm proud to champion A4663, which would both enhance reentry services and restorative justice hubs in Trenton, Camden, Newark, and Patterson. The question came up about earlier today, how are we going to sustain this after two years, the $8 million that it's going to cost? And we said, use that cannabis money. That's how we're going to try to pay for this, because to reinvest into our children is definitely makes it better for the next generation. And it's time New Jersey makes a difference in investing in our kids instead of prisons and to incarcerate them. The passage of this bill is an emergency response. And I also look forward to the complete transformation of New Jersey's broken youth justice system through the passage of New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act A710, another institute priority. In addition to the youth transformation, police reform is critical in the Garden State. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of police officers galvanized the nation and shined a light on the need for law enforcement to eliminate these strategies that would escalate police civilian interactions. I just have a quote that I wanted to read from Martin Luther King as we uplift his name in this conversation. And it may be true that the law can't make a man love me, but it can stop him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important. And I'm gonna read it again. It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can stop him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important. And so when I think about legislation, as we forward here in 2021, we're talking about ending the chokehold ban in New Jersey, and that's Bill A4284. And so we have to be conscious and strategic about making sure that we end this. Building up on the work of the Attorney General, we must take the next step in making sure that it's banned. We keep hearing about the station house adjustments and curbside laws. Be strategic and deliberate and speak out and say, no, we don't want this. Because on one hand, they're supportive of our youth, and then on the other hand, they're still trying to incarcerate them. So let's not be hoodwinked. Let's be clear what we're fighting for, and that's dollars to support our children in and out of jail. If you take a look at the Institute and you hear these stories from these children who have lived through these ordeals, being in Jamesburg and being in these other juvenile correction centers, it's horrific. Nobody should have to go through that. Our youth shouldn't have to go through that. And we're saying that there is a better way. There is an alternative, because we don't even want you to end up there in the first place. So let's work together as legislators, as nonprofits, and I look forward to working with the Institute. Thank you so much for all of your support.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman. And if I had a mic, I'd drop it myself right after those powerful remarks. We're so grateful to work with you on these issues. And actually at this time, I want to flip the script and actually turn to our repairing the harm section of conversation so that we can end with the elections because it's such an important election year with Henel. So we'll turn to actually my colleague Tiara at this time, talk about repairing the harm of racism. So Tiara, COVID-19 has fundamentally transformed our everyday lives. Nowhere has its impact been more greatly felt than in our Black and Brown communities. As we illustrate in our agenda, the Black to white likelihood of COVID-19 related hospitalization is over 2 to 1. What is needed to get resources to these communities, both in response to the public health crisis and beyond it? And what could we all do to partner with the Institute to help?
So thank you so much for your question, Andrea. And thank you, of course, to all of the people who are watching us on Zoom and Facebook, sticking with us as we move through this program. As you point out, the public health crisis has really served to exacerbate a lot of the rampant inequalities in our state. New Jersey's death toll, unfortunately, is already creeping past the 18,000 mark, and it's really going to continue to grow and has no signs of slowing down. Data showing that not only are Black people facing a higher likelihood of hospitalization, they're facing higher rates of COVID-19 mortality, and they're more likely to suffer from things like joblessness that are really affecting people in communities of color. In the period right before the pandemic, New Jersey's Black to white unemployment rate was 2.6 to 1, which is actually one of the highest in the region. And the pandemic brought with it devastating job loss. So Black workers who are really overrepresented in industries and jobs that prevent them from being able to work from home are suffering disproportionately. community. Black families with children in particular are facing a crisis within a crisis because they're experiencing higher rates of food insecurity, in addition to being less likely to have access to computers or broadband internet, which are impeding their ability to homeschool. In Newark, where the Institute is based, nearly 1 in 5 people, so 20% of the population under 65 is uninsured. And it's in predominantly low-income Black and Brown communities, places like Newark and Trenton, Elizabeth, Patterson, that residents are bearing the brunt of the crisis, being forced to choose between things like paying rent, buying groceries, and really having enough in emergency savings to get them through a storm, a hospital visit, or even worse, a long-term hospital stay related to COVID. Recently, we've heard the call of Newark residents who have been forced to borrow against their retirement savings in order to make rent or mortgage payments, and those who unfortunately have no savings and are really being kept afloat by family and friends supporting them through this crisis. Until just 2 months ago, New Jersey actually had the highest rate of COVID-19 mortality among the adult incarcerated population, and it currently ranks 6th in the nation. New Jersey's youth haven't been spared, as 75 youth who are in Juvenile Justice Commission facilities have tested positive for COVID since April. As my colleague Ashanti mentioned, New Jersey has a very high Black to white youth incarceration racial disparity, even though Black and white children commit most offenses at similar rates. And so what that means is that when coronavirus spreads through our youth facilities, it's Black children who are being disproportionately affected. As a result of advocacy by the Institute and partners across the state, New Jersey passed a law in April 2020 requiring hospitals to publicly report detailed demographic data on COVID-19 positive cases and deaths down to the municipal level. Unfortunately, to date, this information hasn't been published to the New Jersey Department of Health website as required by the legislation. Recovering from the pandemic is really going to require communities to advocate for what they need and elected officials to respond. So we need reliable local level demographic data to highlight where the disparities are and to ensure that those communities receive tailored support and resources through the duration of the crisis and beyond. I'm encouraging everyone to please visit the Action Center. I know the link has been dropped several times on Zoom to learn more about this legislation and to urge the New Jersey Department of Health to release this crucial municipal level data. The legacy of discriminatory policies, which created the segregation that we're unfortunately seeing across New Jersey today, has resulted in communities of color having less access to wealth, safe and stable housing, and other economic and social resources that families really need in order to prevent themselves from contracting COVID-19. Racialized discrimination and government inaction have left Black New Jerseyans unable to protect themselves from one of the worst public health crises we've seen in recent memory. There's a direct line from slavery to today's system of racialized oppression. Unfortunately, there's been voter suppression, racial wealth disparities, mass incarceration, crumbling infrastructure, and so much more in Black communities across the state, just like the rest of the country. In essence, Black people have really taken on the inheritance that no one deserves. But right now, we have a unique opportunity to ensure that COVID-19 recovery is truly inclusive. We think that New Jersey should be and can be a model for accountability, progressive thought, and action when it comes to redeeming itself from its original sin. It's through taking affirmative steps and measures to take responsibility and repair the damage that we can contribute to the healing of society to everyone's benefit. And so moving the state forward will require us to take, of course, a first step. And so passage of S322A711, an important legislation that is championed by Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter, who you'll be hearing from momentarily, would establish a reparations task force to make sweeping policy recommendations that implement deep investments into New Jersey's communities of color that are impacted by New Jersey's system of racial discrimination. Given the large number of Black and Brown families unable to make ends meet even before the crisis, and the growing urgency of everyone's socioeconomic needs now, the time for action is immediately. And with that.
Thank you so much, Tiara. And I just saw a question popped up in the chat if the bills that we're talking about are listed somewhere on the Institute website. They are listed in our action agenda, which we are both dropping in the chat and is available on our website at www.njisj.org. And with that, I will turn to our question around repairing the history of racism for Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter. Assemblywoman, thank you so much for being with us today. For the past several years, the Institute's been proud to stand with you on array of issues. I can't even count how many issues, ranging from the passage of historic rights restoration legislation that restored the right to vote to 83,000 people on probation and parole, the historic legislation, to the introduction of the New Jersey Youth Justice Transformation Act. You've also stood with us to call for comprehensive data outlining the impact of COVID-19 on New Jersey's Black and Brown communities, as well as the creation of a New Jersey Reparations Task Force. Can you speak to why it's so important for us to understand the impact of COVID-19 on New Jersey's communities of color, and why a call for a reparations task force is both necessary and timely now?
Andrea, and to the Institute of Justice, to Ryan, Tiara, every person there, I hope you can hear me okay, but your research, your partnership is critical to the systemic and structural change that we here in New Jersey. We can't do this work without you. You supply us with the data so that Assemblywoman Reynolds Jackson, Assemblyman Wimberly, Cunningham, and of course, Lieutenant Governor Oliver can do the work. We can stand on the knowledge that we have the facts to support policy change that we so desperately need. To the hand, as you noted, COVID-19 has exposed the cracks and racial injustice in our society's foundation, not New Jersey. This caused an earthquake in Black communities and communities of color. For this reason, I am proud to champion legislation which has since become law, required New Jersey to publicly report data at the municipal level, the county level, and the state levels to illuminate the impact of this health crisis had on our communities, and we had to do it at speed. However, despite demographic information regarding COVID-19 positive cases, hospitalizations, deaths has not been made available at the municipal level. This crucial data helps us to shape science. It also helps us to tailor specific policies and practices to repair the harm caused by the crisis in our communities that's already subjected to extreme racial disparities prior to the pandemic, which you heard so eloquently stated by Tiara. So thank you for that. I join with the Institute in urging our Department of Health to publicly release the data so we can begin to repair the harm that COVID-19 has caused. And speaking of repair, I want us to discuss tonight, as the Institute has pointed out, that we need to create a normal. Coming out of this pandemic, we have a greater understanding how we care for our communities. For so long, for generations, Assemblyman Wimberly pointed this out, for over 400 years plus over 200 years of slavery, we have divested resources from our Black communities, whether through housing discrimination, over policing, desperate incarceration, or creating roadblocks to democratic principles. In this moment of national racial reckoning, we can begin to address the complicity in the racial disparities we see today. California has done it, so New Jersey can be up next. As a state, we see some of the worst racial disparities in the country, and we should join this national effort and create New Jersey Reparations Task Force. In doing so, we can understand how we got here today and begin to create reparative systems and structures to make Jersey's Black communities whole. I'm ready to partner with the Institute. I know that Lieutenant Governor is a lover of history and story, so it's important that we learn our history, that we study it, that we put the task force together. I need for each of you to join us in calling for the task force to be created in the garden to do just that. And I want to thank you for me tonight, and thank you for being a partner in the work of social justice.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Sumter. We are so grateful for your leadership, and we hope that it will continue for many years to come. And my last question for the panel is for my colleague Henel. around this idea of democracy for all. And well, this year, as we just talked about, thanks to the advocacy of so many on this call, the legislative leadership and the governor, we were able to restore the right to vote to 83,000 people in New Jersey on probation and parole, many of who were able to vote for the first time ever. The need to expand and protect access to democracy is more important now than ever. Indeed, if the actions of the past few weeks have taught us nothing, it has taught us this: elections matter. Can you highlight for us the priorities the Institute has identified over the next 2 years to ensure democracy for all, and what we all can do to support those efforts?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you to all the panelists who are here today and everyone who's watching. It's been a great event, and I know we're all blessed to be able to work with such great leaders in the State House and with Lieutenant Governor Oliver. As Andrea said, elections matter. This past election and the weeks that have followed have highlighted to us just how fragile and precious and crucial our democracy is. Right? Yesterday, President Biden said the same in his inauguration. It's especially true when so many are working to undermine and suppress it. As so many of us know, violence as a response to democracy is not new, particularly when we start seeing Black and other people of color begin to finally have a voice. From the Civil War to Selma to the insurrection on January 6th, coming at the same time that Georgia elected its first Black senator. This is just something that happens, but we know that to oppose those forces who try to suppress and undermine democracy, those of us who care about democracy must commit to it, must double down on it. And we must work to ensure that we actually have a democracy for all. That means that we must eradicate registration barriers, ensure safe access to the ballot box, and to stop denying people the right to vote. So with all of that in mind, we're going into 2021 with some priority legislation, some priority issues that we think are necessary right now in New Jersey. The first is same-day registration. New Jersey's arbitrary 3-week registration deadline disenfranchises people year after year. Over 20 states allow people to register same day, including on election day. We must join them. There is a legislation, S2824, A4548, championed by Senator Cunningham and Assemblyman Mukherjee. We need to pass that. 2, in-person early voting. This is a bill the governor has expressed support for. The legislators are working on right now. Senator Gill, Assemblyman Zwicker. People need options for how to vote, and they should have them. We should have voting, including on Sundays, because as souls to the polls is an honored tradition in Black communities. There's no reason to deny people options for voting. We did last year in 2020, we did a post-primary election assessment. We did work in the November election. Time and time again, we saw especially Black and other voters of color wanted to vote in person on machines, ideally. While the national rhetoric was saying one thing, the reality is vote by mail is traditionally distrusted by Black and other voters of color more. And that bore out in New Jersey, as we saw in November. Third, we must limit police presence at voting location. There is an excellent bill championed by Assemblyman Reynolds Jackson, who's here with, who you just heard from, and Senator Turner. No one should be afraid to cast a ballot. And the reality is that some Black and brown voters fear the police for good reason, for a lot of the things we just talked about. Support this crucial legislation. We have an action alert for it. The link's been on the chat box. You can support it and tell your legislators to pass it and to support Assemblyman Reynolds Jackson's bill right now. Fourth, we must finally restore the vote to people who are in prison. Andrea just mentioned the bill, the historic bill that restored voting rights to people in parole and probation that Assemblywoman Sumter, who you just heard from, championed. It was crucial, but we need to go further. We must sever the tie between the criminal justice system and the electorate. There is no good reason to deny people in prison the right to vote. 62% of the prison population is Black, in a state where the Black population is only 15%. Denying people in prison the right to vote imports the racism of our broken criminal justice system into our electorate, and we should stop. DC last year was the first jurisdiction to restore voting rights to everyone. It is time for us to become the first state to do so. We should join Maine and Vermont, who've never denied the right to vote to people with a criminal conviction, including people in prison. Maine and Vermont also happen to be the two whitest states in the country. Fifth, this year is a big year, not just in elections, but otherwise in democracy, because we are going to be doing redistricting this year. Redistricting is the foundation of our representative democracy. Right after the census, we redraw our political boundaries in order to ensure one person, one vote. It is crucial. So while we do that this year, we must ensure that New Jersey's diversity is represented in our legislative and congressional maps, that a state that is over 45% people of color has a government that actually looks like it. We will have public hearings. There will be a lot of things. We hope you participate in them. And finally, I'll just say that, as mentioned, it's a big election year. And as we did last year and as we do every year, we are committed to providing useful, easy to understand voter education materials, from information about upcoming election formats to our voter website to other documents and materials, including an updated version of our virtual candidate forum toolkit. I urge you all to be civically engaged, to take our democracy seriously, reach out to elected officials, candidates, and have a candidate forum, including the elected officials who are here with us today. Ask questions, host a forum. With these priorities, these priorities are important because with them, we can finally get to a point where other states already are, but then move past them so that we in New Jersey can be a leader, to just show the country that we can have an expansive, inclusive democracy in a diverse state. And we can do this across the country. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Henel, and thank you to our incredible panel. Thank you to Lieutenant Governor Oliver and our legislators for staying on this whole program. We have time for about 10 minutes of audience Q&A, and there are a lot of questions that have been coming in. The first one I see, Assemblyman Sumter, I think this will be towards you. There is a lot of interest in supporting the reparations task force. And one question that came up a few times is when the hearing will be and how people can support and turn out to the hearing.
So what I would love for people to do is send letters either through the Institute, also to me directly, because I'm pushing the speaker who has control of the agenda, Speaker Craig Coughlin, to post our bill for a hearing. That's the first step. So we need to get it heard. And when we have that hearing, the Institute will make sure you all know so you can testify and tune in and learn what it is that we're trying to do to get the reparations task force set up.
Great, thank you. And this next question is for Assemblywoman Reynolds Jackson. People are a bit confused because they know that thanks to the Public Health Emergency Credits Bill, these young people were being able to be released. So wasn't there money tied to that release? Kind of what is the point of this restorative justice pilot bill? Do we not have the money for the young people? And how, again, can they support next week's really important hearing?
Right. So one, we need people to sign up to testify on the hearing and why it's important. And because it's afterwards, so we still have people that are there. We still have people that we have to bring home. We still need wraparound services. You know, a lot of times there's this disconnect. Once you come home, it's just like you're here. But we need the number one problem is housing. When they come home, housing is stable for maybe about 30 days. But then afterwards, you know, you're looking for a job, you got barriers, you got ID, you got food insecurities. There's a whole lot of mental health that needs to continue. And so we know that all of these services work together. And so it's not just you come home and that's it, but we're looking to do this for a long term. This is a 2-year. We want to continue the process so that, again, as people unfortunately go in, or we can be able to stop them from going in from the first place. So, but we need the resources to do that.
Great, thank you. And so the next question is a two-parter. So first, it was a clarifying question for Tiara. Tiara, you had mentioned that we don't have the COVID-19 data available at the local level. There were questions about if the hospitals aren't releasing the data, kind of what the holdup is. And then to Lieutenant Governor Oliver, if there's anything that people on the call can do to get the Department of Health to hopefully release that information so we're able to know at the local level the impact. So I'll turn to first Tiara and then Lieutenant Governor, if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
So obviously the larger issue is just around non-compliance. I'm not sure where the breakdown is. As per the legislation, the Commissioner of Health is supposed to require hospitals to report this statewide demographic data. In turn, the reported data is compiled by county and municipal level and then published to their website. So we're not really clear whether the issue is around hospitals not reporting the data or it's actually just not being made publicly available. I'm inclined to think that it's probably the latter, though I can't say with certainty. So we're really trying to get to understanding where the issue and the breakdown is really with the compliance that's laid out by the legislation.
And I would just add that we absolutely do know the numbers. We do know that the data is compiled. For those of you who keep up with the governor's COVID-19 briefings, he does them generally Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. At each one of those briefings, the Commissioner of Health reports how many people were tested positive on a particular day, how many people were hospitalized, how many people are on ventilators, and how many deaths have been experienced. There has been, so the data is collected. It is required by statute for hospitals and other facilities, for instance, our nursing homes, our extended care facilities, but there has been a problem with that data being publicly disseminated and placed somewhere. Senator Ron Rice, who chairs the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus, has been a perpetual drum beater around this issue. I really don't know why the information and the data has not been released, but as Tiara made reference to, that means that we're out of compliance with the law. I would encourage those who really, are passionate about this to send correspondence to the commissioner and to also express to Senator Rice your interest in that data so that it is not believed that he is just trying to be obstructionist with the department, that he is trying to get that data out because people need to know. People need to know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And in addition to the helpful strategies that Lieutenant Governor Oliver mentioned, the Institute, we also have a phone to action tool around this issue available on our website as well. And the last question we'll have for Assemblyman Wimberly. Assemblyman Wimberly, there were a lot of questions around baby bonds. What is kind of the purpose of baby bonds? Giving babies money, is that really the way to close the racial wealth gap? I know Laura spoke to and you spoke to it a bit in your comments, but just giving money away, how is that going to solve kind of all these racial inequities we're trying to combat?
Well, first I would say we're not giving money away. I think it's money that, that has been built on the back of our ancestors for many years. So when people start talking about giving us anything, they should be giving us a free higher education. They should be giving us free down payments for our homes. They should be giving us free health care. So those are the things that free, then it's not even free, it's really earned. So if you look back and, reparations, my assemblymate will eat you up on, or them up on that if they have any questions with that, but this is earned, this is not anything given. This program basically is going to give 75,000 babies born in 2021, $1,000, basically for incomes of 131 of families of 4 or more. And it's just a start. And many people say, it's not enough. And I agree with them. I don't think it's enough, but it's a start. When you get to that point, it will help you with junior college. It will help you with trade school. It may be able to help you move out and get a condo, if you are working in a vocational trade or anything along that line. So this is not a handout. This is something that I think is earned, and I think we should be increasing it. as time goes on, and we should be increasing the amount of families that receive these types of funds. And you've given all the numbers when it comes to the disparity. Anytime you're talking about the disparities of 300,000 to 7,000, this is America in 2021, and that is just totally ludicrous. You think about it. So there's nothing about giving anything away. This is earned money that has been built on our ancestors' backs. It's much deserved.
I want to add one other level to that, Assemblyman Wimberly. You know, when the Congress, and we know we have a new Congress now, but in the last Congress, when the both houses had to create the CARES Act to get funding out in the street to help address the issue of the pandemic, we saw some of the top corporate earners, meaning companies in this country, receive significant numbers of dollars to help them, quote, brace up from COVID-19. We all saw Shake Shack. We saw NBA teams. We saw other entertainment fields being given subsidy. You know, I can't understand why there is always objection to investment in people. Investment in people gives you your greatest ROI, return on your investment. If in this country we do not begin to broaden our thinking that it's not governmental subsidization of people to invest in people. You know, in other countries, for instance, let's talk about those high rates of maternal and infant mortality amongst Black and Brown communities. There are countries in the world that if you are a woman who becomes pregnant, automatically you are assigned either a doula or a midwife and someone that works with you through 9 months of pregnancy to make certain you have a healthy baby born. Why do those countries do that? Because they understand that an investment at that level helps defer a greater cost they'll have at the end if those things aren't done. But we have to get over this notion that it's a giveaway program or, you know, it's just giving stuff to people. It is basically an investment in human capital. Invest in human capital, and that investment will pay off for this country, this state as well. But it is a notion, interestingly, that people have problems with in the wealthiest country in the world, the United States. But it is not a concept that is frowned upon in other countries. They get it. I think in the 21st century, and as we move toward a new decade, we have to understand that concept as well.
And Lieutenant Governor, I want to add that we do not have a problem with paying $61,000 for somebody to be incarcerated, but we will fight nail and tooth to give a quality $18,000 public education. So it's pick and choose on what we're giving away. So we'll give away $61,000 for to lock somebody up in a cell, but we will not, build our schools and giving them state-of-the-art, laboratories and gymnasiums and classrooms and fight, forever, So what we choose to invest in is a choice that the majority, which is a majority of people that do not look like us or not a brown and colored people, have decided that that's a bigger investment that they will make. And they never complain about that. Building jails, locking people up, things of that nature is never an issue.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Assemblyman Wimberly and Lieutenant Governor, for those powerful remarks. That's the best way to end the program that I can think of, investments that we're willing to make, and that speaks to accountability. As I mentioned, this is an important election year. Governor's seat up, every single seat in the legislature is up. Use this action agenda, use this document to hold the people who want your vote accountable to making investments in the Black and Brown communities of New Jersey. And so with that, we have the agenda in the link. We put it, in the chat. We put it there a few times. We also have it on our website at njisj.org. We need to see the light and we need to be the light of social justice right here in New Jersey. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank the Institute team, our esteemed Board of Trustees, and all of you for joining with us to determine how we can work together to make Black lives really matter in the Garden State. And you'll see our Board of Trustees there that we are so thankful for. For more information on the Institute and our campaigns, please visit our website at njisj.org. In the meantime, stay safe and have a wonderful rest of the evening. Good night.